So hello there, everyone.
Hi there. Hey,
Let's introduce ourselves. My name is Evgeny Vyazemtsev. Today I'll be asking silly questions. I'm a tour guide in Georgia and Tbilisi, and with us today are...
Vitaly Shtybin, a historian and ethnographer who loves the Caucasus and is always telling everyone about it.
Great, and
Eliseeva, historian, guide, cartologist who has lived in Georgia for a long time, has traveled almost all over it and loves it immensely.
Eka, we have a fairy sound just for you.
Georgian fairy.
Of course.
We need an analog of the word winks in Kartvelian.
I think that, of course, the fairy sound in Georgia is, of course, truly the clinking of glasses.
Or...
Yes, for example. Yes.
Super, I like that. Let's start with that.
So, today we have a trial recording, so we'll talk about the coolest, most amazing things you found in your travels. So, go ahead and start, and I'll be here to ask you dumb questions. Or silly questions. Or just questions. We'll see how it goes.
All right.
Or maybe we'll ask you the same kinds of questions.
Yeah, because you have something to share yourself.
We will share.
Share.
Well, listen, honestly, I've always been curious. Each of us has traveled tens of thousands of kilometers all around Georgia over the years, and honestly, people often ask me, what's your absolute favorite region or part of the country? That question always stumps me. I can't say which region is my absolute favorite because there are no bad or good ones. There are just ones I love. Maybe I know a bit more about some and a bit less about others.
Let's try to get out of this dead end, out of this stupor. So, based on how you feel right now, tell me, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you're asked that question? When people do ask you?
That's my love.
Tusheti is your favorite. As for me, I can't really single out just one region like that. Probably because they're all so different. You know, it's clear that it's difficult.
Vitaly, focus, please.
Let's think about it. For me, I think the place I always took everyone to, because it's also, by the way, close by, it's the Didgori battle, that monument, and the amazing view you get from there. For me, that place was probably the main one. I went there the most, basically always, and I always take everyone there first. And it's really impressive, of course, those monuments are awesome, standing under that huge sword with the mountains in the background. On the other hand, honestly, every single season, the view is just a little bit different there, just a little bit. Spring there is actually quite long. It's kind of a bit northern, a bit marshy, and it feels really unique. And summer is cool, really nice, with lots of tall grasses and lush, vibrant greenery everywhere, spreading out all around you.
It's always windy there, and in summer it's pleasant because even though it's high up, there's always a good breeze.
It's great there in the summer. In August, we went to see the waterfalls. Look, when you arrive there at night, the sky feels really close, so to speak.
That's where the word Perseids comes in.
Perseids.
All right, so we actually have two amazing spots. One is farther away, the other is closer. And let's find out more about them in detail. I'll share my favorite place in Georgia. Eka, go ahead.
Well, to be honest, I'm actually being a bit disingenuous when I say Tusheti and single it out in particular because it's just my personal preference. I prefer the highland regions, the mountainous areas of Georgia, those that border the Caucasus Range, the Greater Caucasus, the Kafkasioni, and that includes, of course, Khevsureti and Khevsureti as well. Well, in general, it's actually a bit hard to separate them because they share one big common history, at least they did once upon a time.
First silly question. Tell me, please, how do they treat you with a bath? To the regions adjacent to the Greater Caucasus Range?
Yes, of course it belongs, but in our case, let's say, first of all, it's located in the northwest, which means it's farther away, and because of this distance, it's always stood a bit apart from the others, so you can't really group it together with anyone else, since it has always maintained a certain degree of separation. Well, all right, you could conditionally compare it to Lechkumi or to Lower Svaneti, geographically and administratively, but in terms of expression, of course, they are completely different. They all really stand apart. I think we'll get to them as well.
Yes, just try to unite the Svans into some kind of community. They'll unite you themselves somewhere.
He's probably closer to, well, from that side, I'm comparing it to Karachay-Cherkessia. It's more or less similar there, of course, in terms of culture. They have certain aspects, let's say. And these are some rather isolated, specifically mountainous areas. Somewhere like Kabardino-Balkaria, even, I would say.
Kabardino-Balkaria, there it's right over the ridge, across the pass, where they used to go for salt, the Svans and so on. Oh, look, it's as if nothing happened, and we're already talking about the Svans, right? Even though you wouldn't think so.
Pause on salt. Why mention salt among Svans?
because it's truly impossible to live without salt. And the Svans didn't have any. They therefore had to make rather challenging and perilous journeys for salt. Journeys which, unfortunately, very often and quite tragically ended in death for many people, sometimes entire families. That's why sometimes they use the expression, he went for salt, instead of saying he died.
You can't see how wide my eyes got on the podcast, but honestly, they really did.
That's it for the Svans and Salt ad break.
Yes, that's actually what I was leading up to, but I was kind of searching for the right way. I don't know. I was looking for a little pebble, and here we have a whole diamond. Yes, and actually, nowadays, Svanetti is famous for its widely used seasoning, Svan salt.
Yes, they invented it out of necessity, because to save on salt, they would mix it with all the mountain herbs they gathered in the spring, right around this time of year. And the recipe for Svan salt, well, you could say that in principle it has survived to this day. Yes, but it's believed, the Svan say that of course you'll never find real Svan salt in Tbilisi. But we know that's not true. We even know people from whom you can get authentic Svan salt without ever leaving Tbilisi.
Let's put that question on hold, yes. All right, well, let's...
Rachaham.
Yes. Oh, we've brought up too many topics. Now let's try once again to return to our Kevsurs and their neighbors.
We're coming back. Let's get back to the Tushins after all, because in fact, it is among the Tushins that a number of holidays have been preserved, which of course come from a distant pagan past. The Tushins are Christians, but nevertheless, like all Highlanders, they live according to their own way of life, preserving the traditions of their ancestors, which I think go back to the Middle Ages, more or less. And what's also interesting about traveling to the mountain regions is that, of course, they have a lot in common with their neighbors on the other side of the ridge, the Ingush, the Chechens. And you can see how all of this is so intricately somehow intertwined. And as a result, at these festivals, for example, the Highlanders always brew their own beer. And we remember, for example, from Egypt that beer is a sacrificial drink. Actually, this was the case among many peoples.
Among mountain people beer.
A silly question, another one. Is it possible to find real mountain beer in Tbilisi?
You mean that very beer? Well, in Tbilisi, I don't think so, but in the village of Akhmeta in Kakheti, yes.
Because it's short-lived there, meaning once it's brewed, it needs to be drunk.
No brewing here.
They don't use preservatives there. That's why it's a live beverage.
No, I mean, there isn't a brewery in Tbilisi itself that I haven't heard.
No. Look. It's actually a sacred drink. That is, it's not brewed just for the sake of drinking beer. Yes. It's something that's brewed at specific times for certain holidays, and a certain number of days have to pass after Easter. In general, this series of holidays is called Otniganoba, and more or less all the peoples living in the Caucasus Mountains have it. It just goes by different names. And this beer, it's a whole ritual. It's brewed by a specific person, someone chosen for the task. This takes place in a specific location. Women are not allowed to enter there because otherwise the whole process will be ruined. Well, it's kind of a sacrilege.
Well, have you tried it?
Yes, of course I've tried it. I think Vitaly tried it too. Yeah, probably.
Now I'm honestly a bit jealous of you.
I compared it to Ossetian beer. It's the same story there. They even tried to make it in factories. I know that there's a brand like that.
That's exactly what I was trying to figure out. Did it ever catch on with the general public?
It took off locally, but in reality, this isn't the kind of beer we imagine. It's more like a thick kvass, really. Something closer to that. So it's very...
Millstone?
Look, it's this kind of cloudy liquid, sort of a light brownish color. And it's about as strong as kefir. Well, maybe there, I don't know, 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. So it's like kvass or mead, something like that. It's more like mead, probably, just without the taste of honey because it's brewed with barley, and basically nothing else is added to it. It's a purely natural product, lightly fermented, but they drink it in very large quantities.
This has...
How to address low alcohol content.
It's an ancient tradition in Europe in the 16th century. They also made this kind of beer, but it wasn't really considered an alcoholic beverage. It was like liquid bread. Families drank it, kids drank it, everyone did. It needed time to develop any alcohol content to ferment a bit. That's why it was the norm. It was only later, with 19th century technologies, that they made the kind of beer we know today. This is not it. In the North Caucasus, there's also something called Maxima or Maxima. It's the same thing. In Kabardino-Balkaria, basically, in Circassia, the Adige territories, the Shapsugs, they make it there. Difference, this isn't barley but millet.
And I think that, in fact, millet used to be much more popular in the past, of course, because we know that before that, well, wheat is just hard to ripen and it needs a lot to grow. In the mountains, it doesn't ripen at all, right? So millet, of course, was the main type of grain that was used. Well, and barley is more of a later development, I guess.
It's an additional thing.
I think we've stumbled upon one of the potential topics for our podcast. That is, of course, even local. Local. Well, drinks, food, stories like that.
I recently gave a lecture on exactly this topic.
Eka, that's exactly why you're here.
Yes.
Wow.
So, guys, please listen carefully to Ika.
Yes, keep an eye out for announcements, definitely. So, besides beer, what else attracts you?
Well, obviously, and of course, it's the absolutely incredible and breathtaking views that stand out. But then again, yes. Are the views in Tusheti different from those in Svaneti? Yes, they are, because the mountains themselves are different. They are different distances from each other. So it's a different landscape. Even in Tusheti, when you move from one part to another, yes, when you cross over, on this side and the other side of the Alazani, things change. Scenery. And when you go up higher into Tusheti, it starts to change again. All of it turns into lush alpine grass.
That's a fact. By the way, we have Kevsereti, we have Tusheti, we have Svaneti, which we mentioned today. There's also Racha, yes, which it's really quite special also because of these spruce forests. Even people who grew up in Altai, I know, including some doctors, usually make comparisons. It's very similar to some kind of Altai spruce.
Would you like to hear about Christmas trees? I'll tell you about them too in Racha, of course. In fact, most of the Christmas trees in Europe actually come from seeds from Racha. This is an entire industry run by doctors. There, in several places in regions such as Racha or Lechkumi, collect the seeds of these fir trees, the Nordman firs. And it's great. They send them to Europe, and about 80% of the fir trees grown in Denmark, and Denmark is actually the main supplier of Christmas trees, are all grown from Racha firs.
Wow.
Georgian New Year asked Danes for Christmas tree compensation.
Actually, there's even a documentary on YouTube. I think the BBC made it. And it's really interesting how young people from Racha skillfully climb these enormous fir trees and pick the cones. It's actually pretty dangerous because, of course, there's no safety equipment and they fall.
By the way, at the entrance to Racha, I was there once in the summer. The region is called Argveta, with a river. Before you reach Kutaisi, turn north to Racha. The road climbs onto a plateau, higher and higher. There it is. It's called Skanda Fortress, up on a hill, really. Ruins, beautiful and picturesque. Not everyone makes it there. No? Take Skanda, for instance. It's historically significant, as it was a gateway to Imereti. Everyone was fighting over it. And so one summer I went there, climbed up to the fortress. It's quiet, it's awesome. On one side, all of Imereti stretches somewhere down to the horizon. On the other side, the gentle slopes rise up with those Racha fir trees. That scent is everywhere. So I was walking along the fortress wall. I walk up to where there must have been a corner tower, and suddenly, right from under my feet, literally from beneath the bricks, an eagle bursts out. It just took off and flew away, somewhere off into the distance, yeah. So its nest was just there. Apparently people come by so rarely that it felt safe enough to build it there. It was, of course, quite an impression, being so close to the living world. And the fact that it's so quiet there, especially quiet, is fascinating. It gives you a sense of tranquility.
Exactly. You're right. It's always very quiet in the mountains. So actually, when we leave Tbilisi and head out into nature, there's this silence. You can see the stars, and in Tusheti, all of that is multiplied by 50. Complete silence, absolute relaxation. So where else would you record a podcast? Then those stars, it's like you could just reach out your hand and grab them.
And you can see the whole Milky Way. All right. That's a fact, yes. Podcasts in the mountains can only be recorded like this, with the cheapest microphone you can buy.
Cool, all right. Yeah, the stars, the views, the beer.
What else is there? Tusheti, right? Just now, while we mentioned the Milky Way, I was trying to check myself to see if I really remember what the Milky Way is called in Georgian, that it's the path of the deer.
Interesting. A mythological story, so it turns out.
Of course, of course. She was running away from the hunter.
In the North Caucasus, I think it's called the Rider's Path. Maybe I'm mistaken. I studied this story a long time ago. There's also a whole legend there, and their own names in those villages. Usually it's connected with journeys.
And I thought it was named after the chocolate bar?
The Milky Way, our galaxy. Let's not destroy this childhood dream. He.
Promised silly questions.
And Father Frost lives in Svaneti, right? Of course. Tovlis Baba, Tovlis Baba. Okay, about Tusheti. Well, actually, also, there are a lot of wild bees or goats, as you can see, jumping around there. And you can even see them with the naked eye.
Eka, do they have big horns?
Holds 5 liters of wine.
Yes, yes. If you measure in wine, then yes. I think about 5 liters exactly.
And tukvevers on its head. That
Put a plastic bottle on a goat's head, and you'll definitely get the idea.
this is a Tbilisi local, someone who's already starting to feel a bit tired.
Kalaki.
Kalaki, yes.
By the way, you know, in Tusheti, the sheep are quite special.
And they're tasty?
Yes, they're absolutely tasty because they don't sweat. And there's a kind of unique microclimate. The grass is nourished by the Alazani rivers. And it's not just one Alazani. There are actually 3. All 3 of these Alazani rivers then eventually merge together into the one that flows through the Alazani Valley. And these sheep that graze specifically in Tusheti in the summer are mostly bought up by countries of the Arab continent, the Arabian Peninsula, because they're considered a delicacy, unlike all other sheep in the world.
I've heard, yes, that the Arab world has seriously driven up the price of lamb here in Georgia.
Well, yes, it's amazing how many people are interested, you know. Let's say, well, there are things in Georgia that are so unique, local, right? Like our fir trees, sheep, beer. We even do that, yes, and the whole world, or at least some parts of the world, are super interested in these things, right? And you'd think, develop it, but it's still very local.
Very local. And actually, listen, in Tusheti, I think you could walk across the whole place in a day one way and in a day the other way, lengthwise and crosswise. It's not that big in and of itself. Specifically Tusheti, if we don't count the remote regions where the road goes toward the Pankisi Gorge.
Another interesting thing is that there are quite a few places with a microclimate where special varieties of wine are grown. The first thing that comes to mind is the Atini Valley. I think that's where I went for the first time. In 2022, I was simply invited there as a guest. There's a man there who is a former, if I'm not mistaken, Minister of Culture. He has a small winery there, and he was also involved with the Ateni Church, restoring the church, specifically the frescoes. We visited him and talked. It was interesting.
For our viewers, could you tell us roughly how to get there?
It's not difficult. Head towards Gori. Before you reach it, turn left-south towards Atini and the Atini Valley. The road is narrow. The road goes into the valley.
They're called Atenis Moranis.
Atenis Marani, yes. What's interesting is that terrace farming is really developed there. You can see the terraces very clearly. That's not always the case.
And there's Atenuria, well, that grape variety.
Atenuria, the Ateni church, ancient and very beautiful. Then there's another church where there's a women's convent. They're also quite ancient and beautiful there. Basically, Ateni was considered the royal valley.
Does the word Ateni have a translation?
Athens.
Well, that's the literal translation. There's even a joke, I think, by the way. The Minister of Culture once published it in one of his books, as I recall. He was recalling his youth when he was just an ordinary archaeologist. They were always trying to get a car to reach the archaeological digs, and it was a real problem. And once he wrote a request for a car, and it said that they needed to go to Ateni and something like Rome or Rhyme, some name like that. The girl who was the secretary got confused and wrote Athens and Rome instead. Yes, and there was this really funny situation, like where people were actually asking him, like, is he maybe just trying to get himself a trip to Greece and Italy on the sly, perhaps without anyone really noticing?
Great plan, yeah. Let's keep that in mind. I have a question, Eka. I've actually been there quite a few times, yes, in the mountain regions. How do people live there, for example, when there isn't a tourist season? How much is it, in terms of everyday life, how is it set up? Do you have any information about that?
Well, I haven't actually been there myself in winter, never made it there during that season, because, for example, in Tusheti, you can only get there by helicopter. But according to the locals, those who stay there stock up on supplies for the winter, of course, and from time to time they order things from the mainland via helicopter service. The helicopter, of course, belongs to the border guards because the border runs nearby, and also,
Someone named Sokol brings things.
as if that very Mimino, who, as we know,
Film reference?
yes, because it was filmed in Tusheti, specifically in the remote and picturesque villages of Shinako and Omalo, which is the administrative center of Tusheti. So they live side by side with a wide variety of different animals. Wolves come right up to the very doorsteps of their homes, and it's often said there that, especially during the long and harsh winter months, your main friend in winter is your rifle. A loaded rifle, because if you want to leave the house...
Chekhov's gun. That's it.
Yes, you do have to fire your weapon up into the air in order to try to frighten away a pack of hungry wild animals that are eyeing you greedily, watching you closely.
The best advertisement for a winter trip to Tusheti. Yes, tours called Yum.
Listen, well, they do promise to build a road, and if they do, I'm sure that, of course,
It'll be like Insanity.
it'll be like that.
Closer.
But I think you really need to hurry with Tusheti. If you haven't been, please go to beautiful, unspoiled Tusheti now, because as soon as the road appears, none of the truly unique things that at the present moment set this remarkable and remote mountainous region apart from the rest will remain. This is because, as we have seen time and again, easy, quick money always changes things a lot. People and, in general, the place itself, sometimes irreversibly.
Yeah, coffee shops with soy lattes will pretty much pop up there right away.
Waiting, McDonald's Tusheti.
No, we're not waiting. Zhenya, let's do without it, please. I'm asking you. Honestly, I don't want them to build the road at all because the local residents in general manage just fine without a road. Well, I mean, how do they manage? They go there. Yeah, they're used to it. Even the first snow doesn't bother them. They still get around just fine. Yes, maybe there are some everyday inconveniences, but still it helps preserve the region. Well, yes, it does exist. At one time in Tusheti, by the way, over there, a road was built there in the 1970s. It was constructed earlier than in Svaneti. And you could get there by car, and there was electricity. You can still see the remains of electric poles along the road. But in the 1990s, what happened in the 90s? It was very hard to live in Georgia. So everything that could be sold was sold, and what wasn't sold was destroyed.
Unfortunately, yes, you shouldn't expect that there will be any restrictions here when building the road. Well, any special ones like they sometimes have for certain regions. In different countries, yes, there are places where big businesses aren't allowed in, like some kind of protected area. Well, here, it seems unlikely that something like that would be possible. Especially now, Tusheti and Kevsureti are very popular for tours. All sorts of individual tours, hiking, horseback riding, people go there.
Well, hiking and horseback riding aren't the worst ways, let's say, in my opinion, to use the region's infrastructure.
Overall, I see that a lot of tours are being sold. It's a very popular destination right now precisely because of these features.
That's why it's a great alternative. To some tours, I don't know, like motor or car tours and so on. Because you can actually walk along the route. The Caucasus, leave Tusheti and reach to Kevsureti or the opposite direction with guide. You can go on horseback or on foot. On foot, by the way, it takes about 4 days if you go at a leisurely pace. Some people have done it in 3, but I think that's really walking very, very fast at a brisk pace. And besides, it's not exactly a little path for a stroll. There are high mountain passes. When you cross a pass, like from Sunto, for example, up there you have snow falling, and as you descend, you're back in the hot summer. No, listen, you definitely don't need a road there. Well, please.
I'm afraid it's already hard to roll back now. Well, yes, probably. The region will definitely change a lot. By the way, I have a friend who visited Georgia for the first time last year. And he's a cycling enthusiast, specifically downhill biking. And they rode their bikes up to Tusheti and then rode down. Quite an experience.
Strong legs.
I've seen people like that so many times on the road, and I just don't understand how they do it.
They're magicians.
Just to physically overcome it. That elevation, the 3,200-meter Abano Pass that leads to Tusheti. Climbing up there, and the road is all switchbacks. And you know, that road is considered one of the scariest. She enters as if into...
Well then, Eka, please tell us, what is the popular name for this road?
The Road of Death? Well, I don't know about how popular that is, to be honest.
Just that's what comes up on Google.
easily.
Okay.
Folk name.
It's dangerous mainly because there are a lot of sharp turns, and it's narrow with no guardrails. Yeah, and of course, skilled drivers don't see any problem driving on this road. It's just a road. The main thing is that it exists. But for people who are inexperienced, of course, first of all, I really don't recommend that inexperienced drivers try to go there on their own at all. It's absolutely much better to get a knowledgeable guide, or even better yet, have a local person drive you just to be on the safe side. Locals can drive there practically with their eyes closed.
This is where I'd drive myself.
All right, of course. No one actually drives with their eyes closed, but on my first trip there, I had an experience where the Georgian guide we were traveling with, almost at the very highest, most elevated points on the sharpest, most dangerous and treacherous turns, he was calmly and confidently recording video footage out the side window, all while steering with his knees, right there on those very, very scary spots. And I just looked down, and below me is an abyss, maybe 2 kilometers deep. And he's not even holding the steering wheel. He's there, singing along to the music. Yeah, my knees were shaking. But that was the first time, and after I got used to the road, now I know every turn, every blade of grass there, and I enjoy the views. While many people who are driving there for the first time, they're like, it's so scary, it's so high. But then they get out of the car and they're like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. They're stunned at beauty.
That's called the Road of Death.
Beauty. Once, Evgeny and I drove through the Zakarsky Pass as well. It's also 3, right? Around 3, something like that. And yes, it was very beautiful. Although climbing up there...
Let's just tell our listeners where this is located.
So, for example, if we are traveling from Akhaltsike towards Abastumani, and we want to get to Kutaisi through this huge mountain pass.
First, to Vladimir Mayakovsky's homeland.
Yes, that's right. Through Baghdati?
Across part of the Licky Range.
Sayami, yes, that's where the springs are, and the water is delicious, mineral water. So it turns out that this ascent, the climb there, is the hardest because the road is really rough, and it ended up taking a very long time to drive through it. But overall, at the top, of course, the most impressive thing, the most amazing thing there is just how it is. There are these little houses and sheds put together from planks, and old grandmothers and grandfathers sit there selling honey. Just right there. In the middle of August, there's this really cool, pleasant wind, and the views are incredible. And then there are these flags, with the EU logos fluttering on the sheds and cabinets. It really gives you a sense of Europe right at the very top. Well, it really is an interesting place. And actually, there were quite a lot of cars driving there, despite the difficulties of that mountain pass. You just have to keep in mind that what seems like a short distance actually takes much longer to cover because of how bad the road is. I think it took us about 6 hours to get through there.
About that, yes. Well, if you remember, we also met 2 foreign travelers who had crossed that road by bicycle. And that, of course...
Those are truly remarkable people. Yes, this is an ancient road. It used to lead to Imereti.
Yes. And there were also a lot of trading posts there, a lot of populated trading posts.
Well, from the Ottoman Empire.
So it's an impressive place, worth visiting? Well, probably yes, there are 2 directions of fork in the road. If you go west, you pass through that huge pass to Batumi.
Koderji.
And to the north you have Zakarsky. 2 such wonderful and interesting places.
Eka, anything else about Teshedi, or for now?
Well, since we're talking about the road, I guess it's worth mentioning that even though it's 72 kilometers, it still takes about 5 to 6 hours to get through. And also, by the way, along the road, not many people know this, but there's a bathhouse there.
Wow.
Yes.
Let's go.
A sulfur bathhouse. It used to be run by a very sweet elderly couple. They charge something like 10 lari per person, or even 5 lari per person. Well, calling it a bathhouse is a bit of an overstatement. It's more like a little shed with a pool where usually sulfur water flows.
My favorite.
Yes.
Such places in the Vardzia.
And it would be nice, of course, to clean the window there, but the window is right on the edge of a cliff, and it offers a magnificent view, though it's a bit dirty. That's it. But last year, for example, there was absolutely no one there, and we just went down. Well, we left a little money there afterwards for someone. We don't know who.
Obviously for the wolves in winter.
Yes.
Yes. And by the way, there was a mystery. You know what kind? There was a motorcyclist, apparently from one of the well-known and popular courier companies in Tbilisi, who was riding right alongside us for quite some time, and we thought it must have been some kind of clever advertising campaign. There was really no other explanation that made sense because he rode all the way to Tusheti with us and then back again. But the actual reason for this was still completely unclear.
That's how McDonald's came to Tusheti. Maybe the guy just combined work with a wonderful vacation, a trip.
Possibly maybe he delivered something. Probably.
I'll give you a discount, but at least it's beautiful. Yes. And of course, we should mention that the road to Tusheti is closed starting around September, right?
From the end of October. No, actually, it officially closes around mid-October. But really, it depends on the weather, right? If the weather starts to get chilly and we realize that it's snowing up there, then most likely you shouldn't go anymore. Besides, the tourist season itself basically ends by late September. Oh, when the guest houses close, everyone leaves. They take their animals, all the livestock and so on. That's how it is. And it opens, again, it really depends on the season as well as on the specific climate conditions. For example, right now it's quite chilly here this year, but usually by around mid-June the road is finally cleared anyway, and the very first visitors to Tusheti slowly drive through these truly impressive snow walls where you have these high, thick, towering walls of snow on both sides of the car, creating a truly unique and memorable experience for everyone who passes through.
Awesome.
By the way, as they're showing now, I understand in the GDR there were 3-meter-high walls of snow. Awesome. By the way, let me add something about Tusheti. Once when we were vacationing in Tel Aviv, the hostess at the guest house invited us to organize some kind of festival. They have a big one there. They go away for a whole month. You can come for a couple of days or stay for the whole month. They show movies there and organize all sorts of events. It takes place in July. So basically, as I understand it, it's quite a common thing to hold large-scale events there. So you can easily join in, go there at any time, take part, and see what interesting things are happening.
Yes, well, mainly the Tush people moved to Kakedi for the winter. And these villages, Zimo Alvani and Kvemo Alvani, are inhabited by the Tush people. And I even have a wonderful grandmother who lives in one of these villages. And when people, for example, want to go to Tusheti but can't get there, I arrange a sort of demo version for them. We visit her. She serves Tush cuisine and shows off her carpets in general.
A few words about Tush cuisine, since you mentioned it. Besides beer, they're probably not surviving on beer alone.
Well, for example, there's Gouda cheese, of course. But actually, it's not only Tush, it's more of a mountain cheese, right? It's a cheese made from sheep's milk. Although, to be honest, now they also make it from cow's milk. And it matures in wineskins. In fact, Gouda is the Georgian word for wineskin, right? So it's a turned-out sheepskin. And they put the cheese wheels inside, where they stay for a while and develop a very intense aroma. If someone brings Gouda cheese in their suitcase...
I heard this is one of the most expensive cheeses.
No, Gouda isn't very expensive. It's actually quite an ordinary, simple cheese for shepherds, in fact.
For shepherds, that makes sense. They probably make it themselves. But for sale, is it also generally affordable?
No, Gouda's affordable. You can basically buy it in Tbilisi.
Don't transport it on a plane.
Yes. The kotori is, as you might know, Tushetian khachapuri. They're just made a bit differently from what you might expect from the standard ones. And they end up with a very delicate, light, thin dough. And the cheese is mixed with cottage cheese. Well, I mean, cacio is cottage cheese, yes, but in this case, there's definitely no sulguni in it. These are well-known, local, traditional Tushetian cheeses. And kotori in particular has a distinctive and very unusual taste, as well as a unique flavor. Not the typical khachapuri flavor that we're used to here.
A very tasty way to finish.
Yes. Yum yum.
The tastiest thing, guys, is when you come to Tusheti, you go into the nearby woods, just 5 steps from the road, and there are wild strawberries, blueberries, all scattered around, and mushrooms. That's it.
Yes, for a quiet hunt in Tusheti. Well, now let's move a little closer to Tbilisi, to the Didgori Battle Memorial. Why is he so valuable to you, Vitalik? And why do you really love bringing just anyone there so much?
You know, I just thought about it, and I'll even expand the geography a bit more. Well, let me talk about Didgori now. Well, obviously, it's pretty close, right? It's literally about an hour's drive from Tbilisi. It's quite an ascent. Of course, it's high up, but the road there is good nonetheless. Here, And it's a place where, during hot weather, you can come to a cool, comfortable, peaceful spot and simply relax. And from there, the views are absolutely stunning, with vistas opening up on both sides, the ridge that the road divides, the northern road, and the road that goes to Tsalka on the southern side. So you get this kind of open, expansive space, plus, of course, the monuments themselves, which are truly remarkable.
Maybe we'll do a little dance from the stove. What is the Didgori battle anyway?
The Didgori battle, yes, we really should talk about it, especially since we've already mentioned it. So it's kind of like the famous Battle of Kulikovo in Russia, but here, in this case, it's the Didgori battle. It actually took place way back in the year 1121, so a really long time ago during the Middle Ages, when David the Builder was the king of Georgia. Well, basically, I think just about everyone in Georgia knows about him. David the Builder, also known as David the Restorer, to be precise. And here he defeated a large Muslim army, a coalition of Muslim allies who had ruled Georgia for a long time. This part of Georgia, after the Arab invasion, was under Muslim Arab rule for about 400 years. And so he defeated this united army, and in this way, the liberation of Georgia was completed and it was reunited as a single country. That's when Georgia's golden age began.
Silly question. You say Muslims, but who were they primarily? Turks, Persians, who's there?
For that era, you could say they were Seljuk Turks, as they were called back then. Yes, these were not yet the Ottomans, the Turks we know today. It was more like the Seljuk Turks, their descendants, more like Azerbaijanis, Tatars, those who are now in the Caucasus. Turkic tribes, but not Turks specifically. And their allies were various Arab states of that time, those that existed in the Middle East. Troops were sent to help them, and the Georgian army consisted of the Georgian forces themselves plus allies, also nomadic Cumans from the North Caucasus, peoples like that.
Are these ones tormenting Russia?
Yes, those tormentors, those Cumans, those fierce warriors, they became allies of King David the Builder indeed.
How did they end up here if they were tormenting Russia and now they're in the Caucasus?
Well, Russia was quite far away. And in fact, Russia as such didn't even exist back then. Yes, there was Kievan Rus, and they roamed these wild steppes, the so-called the field, which are the Black Sea steppes. They were nomads there, including in the North Caucasus, yes. And they had quite close ties through trade between Kievan Rus and, in fact, the Georgian state at that time. And often they were involved in dynastic marriages with many of them because they were a powerful force. This cavalry, yes, at that time it was of key importance, the speed and effectiveness of this cavalry, and that's why they often served as mercenaries for various rulers. So David invited them with the proposal that basically, if everything went well, they would settle on his territory. He would allocate them land and they would roam somewhere around here.
What was wrong? The steppe, did it suit them?
Well, actually, there was a lot of competition in the steppe, yes, not only among their own people, where in a way everyone was an enemy to each other, plus other nomads could come and bother you a bit. But here, it's more or less peaceful. Here, in fact, the land itself is very rich, unlike the ordinary steppe. This part of Georgia is flatter, with its lush grasses, these fresh streams. There's plenty of water. Of course, they liked it, so to speak, whenever such an opportunity arose. And actually, after the battle, they stayed here and simply assimilated over time. That's how it was. And there are also reports that there were about 500 so-called Frankish mercenaries. But this was more of a mixed group of crusaders, Catholics, Catholic Franks. In the Caucasus, these were Catholics.
An unexpected cameo of crusaders in Georgian history.
Because at that time, the Crusades had already begun, and there were already, in fact, some state, those very first European ones that came into existence after the Crusades, following those significant historical events. And mercenary work was very widespread in the Middle East, especially among Europeans. So seekers of glory would come here. And Georgian kings participated in the Crusades as well. They, in a way, defended the Holy Land. So, of course, they had connections, and they hired some group. They all fought together, and this is very well depicted on that monument. That is, people usually don't notice right away that the monument there is made up of, on the hill, stands a large structure called a Dedabodzi, which is T-shaped like this.
Go into detail on this.
The T-shaped symbol in Georgia is quite essentially a symbol of the hearth, of the home itself, which holds deep significance in Georgian culture. It is the central pillar that supports the roof.
Essentially, it's the maternal pillar.
The maternal pillar, yes, if you translate it literally, it's where the spirit of the family line is preserved, so to speak. They put it up first, and then the rest of the house's framework is built on top of it. It's like a beam, yes. and it stands in the center, symbolizing the spirit, in this case, the spirit of the people as a whole. And scattered around the hill are these very stylized figures of wounded or dead bronze warriors. And there are these huge 2 or 3 meter tall steel swords and sabers stuck into the ground. And there are, in fact, exactly 3 types of them. If you look closely, there's a Georgian saber, a crusader's sword. And it's exactly that kind of curved, well, there's some debate about it, but there's a hint at a curved blade, which also suggests something Muslim. But overall, it's more like...
Am I right in understanding that these are only the swords of those who actually fought on the Georgian side?
In general, yes. Some people argue that there's an image that supposedly resembles a Muslim saber, but actually...
Is that a Polovtsian weapon?
More likely, yes. You're right that here it's a Polovtsian symbol, meaning it's a Polovtsian saber depicted as one of the 3 allies.
That's interesting, because when I was there, it seemed this image represented the losses on both sides.
Actually, when you start interpreting what it really means, you can see that...
I think that this was the weapon of the mercenaries, yes.
Those who actually won the battle, obviously. And the battle ended with them using deception. At first, the Polovtsians came out as they, well, let's say thanks to their linguistic kinship, it was a bit easier for them. They pulled off a trick, pretending that the army wanted to surrender. And at a certain moment, they started surrounding from all sides, and drove them back. In short, they defeated this army and chased it away. Tbilisi remained as an Arab emirate for another year. After that, it was simply eliminated separately. But overall, it was kind of the last stronghold left. And in this way, the 400-year Muslim rule in Georgia was gradually and steadily undermined over the course of many years, making it impossible for the Muslim rulers to return to Georgia and reclaim their power, or to re-establish the authority they once held. And Georgia began to develop rapidly, even expanding beyond its traditional borders. That's right. So this turns out to be a key moment, and all of this is reflected. It's clearly visible in these symbols. By the way, as we discussed, when the monument appeared, it was actually built quite late, during the Soviet era, very late. And
as I understand it, even the exact date isn't entirely clear. I mean,
it was finally finished back in the 90s.
It seems like they completed it in the 90s. Yeah, it looks like it started in the 80s, the beginning.
Well, that's what's strange, right? Because, well, the imagery of this monument, there are even some elements that aren't really Christian. That strange tree there with those hanging...
Tree of life.
Tree of life, right? That's a bit not canonical.
It's kind of unchristian.
Yeah, that's exactly a national image, typical as a rule for states in the independence period to do things like that. Or earlier in Soviet times, there were also such experiments. But overall, the monument itself is interesting. And what's also convenient is that there are a lot of places for picnics there. So you can come by car, stop there, set up a tent, do whatever you like. Some people even spend the night there. You just need to keep in mind that it's chilly there. Yeah, even in summer, in August, it's pretty cool at night, so you need to bring warm clothes. That's it. Well, the views are beautiful, and you can go down from there. On one side, there's the road to Tsalka. If you don't come from the south and don't turn off but keep going straight, you'll end up on a high mountain plateau. This is the so-called Georgian Siberia, with Lake Paravani and the Greek village of Tsalka with its reservoir, which is also absolutely...
I'm looking forward to when we talk about this.
Yes, it's really a whole epic here. You could talk endlessly about this region alone, because the nature there is unique, the climate is special, and so many of the oldest Stone Age monuments have been preserved. There are some...
Menhirs.
Menhirs?
Our favorites.
My favorite village.
But let me ask a silly question. Menhirs are?
Menhirs are...
Wait, let me look. Kachkars.
Kachkars. Well, the ancestors. The ancestors of Kachkars, yes.
That's a bit more familiar. So it's a cross stone, right? Translated from Armenian.
A Kachkar is a cross stone, which is a beautifully patterned cross among Armenians. It actually really originated from what was called a vishap. In those places where springs begin, they would place these 2-meter tall stones on which they would carve stylized images of various animals. And these stones were believed to guard the spring.
The spirit of the water, something that
comes from paganism.
Yes, of course. It's absolutely pagan, pre-Christian. And these stone pillars, in fact, some of them have survived in the Gvemokartli and Samtske-Javaketi regions. You can find them there. Some still stand right in the middle of a field. Others are now on land where something has been built.
Crosses are carved on the surface.
Yes. Later, of course, with the arrival of Christianity, they started marking them with crosses. So I think that's actually how Armenian Kachkars first appeared.
There's something interesting about Kachkars. Those bishops were standing there, and when the Christians arrived, they simply started placing crosses on top of them. And then, gradually, as it were, the bishop itself disappeared from the base. Although in Armenia, too, there are still some preserved ones. You can still see them in certain places. So it was just a kind of evolution, you could say. And here it's often the opposite. Right on the surface of that stone, sometimes they're 2 or 3 meters tall, and crosses are carved directly onto them. So it's as if the church adapted them. For example, I saw this in Samshvilde, the ancient city. We'll talk about it more later.
Sure.
Inside the chapel, there is a stone like this standing. There is a big one like this in Tbilisi, right near Tsalka. There's a place there that I really, really like. It's absolutely not touristy, practically unknown. If you're heading to Tsalka, and just before reaching Tsalka, you turn north, which is to the right, and then after about half an hour of driving, passing through several villages, you reach the Azerbaijani village of Tbilisi. Today it's Azerbaijani, right? It's kind of situated in a basin, and it's also quite high up there. And there you already get into a forest, a cool spruce forest, something like that, maybe fir trees or something similar. And inside this village, there's a small chapel made of these picturesque old orange stones. It's not functioning, of course, because, as you know, the people living there are Muslims. It's a genuinely medieval chapel, but it's basically empty. Inside, there are some candles standing around. You can tell that people have come in there. But if you climb up the little hill past their Azerbaijani cemetery into the woods there's a huge plateau, and on the plateau, in a remarkable way, excavations were carried out there quite a long time ago. There are what are called cromlechs there. A cromlech is, as everyone knows, it's
Stonehenge?
Stonehenge, except these are small stones. A huge, huge circle, a site bordered by these little stones. There are 2 of them there. And inside the second one, there's a church as well, also in ruins. And what's more, the second one, a wall with a gate has been restored, made right out of these cromlechs. So it's basically the same as what we see at Stonehenge, the same thing here.
Wait, what period exactly is this from? Does this actually work?
About the same, just about.
Pre-Christian era, perhaps you mean?
Absolutely. Very much pre-Christian. This second one.
I think it's at least the 2nd millennium BC. We just can't date such finds precisely. But all of these, let's say, sanctuaries, right? Well, basically, they really were sanctuaries, and there are a lot of them in Georgia. And there are many megalithic structures, the purpose of which we still don't fully understand. And most importantly, we still don't really know the exact methods by which they were actually built. There are a lot of mysteries, and all of this is being studied. And if, of course, Georgia gets additional funding for archaeological excavations, we'll be able to learn much more in the future.
Yes, archaeology in Georgia is a topic for a separate discussion. There are some sad aspects.
And some very interesting ones.
There are interesting ones too, yes. It's just that right now, the opportunities are really quite limited. Certain ideological factors also have an impact on this. But overall, they did some excavations during Soviet times, right? Many excavations were done during the Soviet era. Now they're still digging out of inertia. Some sites have ongoing work, others are less active, but on the Tsalkin Plateau, there are no excavations now.
No excavations. Yes, and there you could just keep digging and digging.
It's a very ancient place.
You dig, can't finish.
Why is it called that? Just a bit further past Tsalka, there's this plateau with Lake Paravani, which stretches even further south. Why is it called the Georgian Siberia? Because this plateau itself is situated quite high up, although you don't really feel it when you go there. And there, just like in, say, Tusheti, it's not as high, but the winters are still quite harsh. There, too.
Very snowy.
Snowy, yes. That's why the old houses you can find there have earthen roofs, and on top of that they're covered with moss, soil, and grasses. So often all of this would get buried in snow.
I'm sure we'll talk more about this fascinating region in detail. Actually, I wanted to share my personal impression of the Didgori Battle Monument. I think it's truly one of the largest monuments, at least in terms of the vast area it occupies. Because when you find yourself standing there for the very first time, you're just amazed at how actively and skillfully the creator worked with the surrounding landscape. Because all these wounded, half-dead warriors, all these swords, they're scattered across a vast area. When you seem to have truly understood everything, I seem to have seen it all. About 10 minutes further along, you eventually come across, as if by fate, yet another part of the monument. Some kind of vigilant herald with a horn, warning everyone of an impending attack or something like that. That's why the monument is truly impressive.
Well, that's a fact, yes, especially when you see this for the first time. And it's interesting that this monument with the man with this horn is also very popular there. Let's actually give a bit of background, shall we? At the site of this monument, in general, the Battle of Dedgor is commemorated with a big festival in August.
Didgoroba.
It's called Didgoroba. It specifically celebrates this battle because it happened in August, on the 12th, I think. And a huge number of people come there with flags, usually national ones. They organize all sorts of games there, big events, that's it. And then before that, actually about a month before, I noticed that many school children come dressed in flags, and where that man with the horn stands, they record various short clips and longer videos there, often on national and cultural themes, expressing pride in their people with great enthusiasm, also with flags. And this happens in a steady stream because it's an interesting place. You can sit down at the base, have some tea, for example, or spread out right by the monument. And here, from time to time, we were competing. And this spot is also very popular with cyclists.
That's because it's really convenient there. You can get there from Tbilisi quickly. It's not far at all. And you can also go through, or whoever wants, through the Betania Monastery, which is nearby. And that's exactly where you can see the Dedgori monument. Yeah, by the way, about school children. In fact, in the summer, you can see a lot of them at all sorts of different locations. Whole classes, those buses, they're always decorated with flags. Everyone is really cheerful, and they listen attentively to what they're being told about this or that, I don't know, church or some monument. It's really heartwarming to see, of course.
Yeah, it's really popular. I've especially noticed that during graduation, they often come to churches and they're wearing those shirts.
With the writing on them, yeah.
With writing and each other's autographs, walking around, setting off colorful flares and things like that. And what's more, no one says anything. For example, I saw this in Bodbe at the convent. No one minds.
I've even seen it in Gergeti.
Yes.
They come to Gergeti. Well, Gergeti is generally considered quite a sacred place, right? It's an active men's monastery. Pilgrims come there. Although, of course, now there's such a tourist flow that it's probably not the same place it used to be, like it was, I don't know, even 5 years ago, for example. I don't know how the monks handle it, to be honest.
They adapt. If someone doesn't like it, I think they just move to a more...
a quiet place, yes. Because, of course, it must be hard to serve in such conditions. And the school children are all fluttering around in groups, very cheerful, everyone taking pictures. And since you mentioned the shirt with autographs, I guess we can also say a few more words about it, right? They have this tradition. For the last bell, they always wear white shirts, both boys and girls, and write wishes and messages on them with markers as a keepsake. And then they keep this shirt for life, often holding on to it as a special keepsake. They bring it to class reunions, remember who wrote what on it, and enjoy talking with friends about those memories.
Yes, it's a really nice tradition. I think it brings classmates together even more than just the usual get-togethers.
Yes, of course.
It's something alive to remember by. Here, going back to Didgori, there's one thing I really like. You can descend towards Gori, and there's a place there that's actually quite rare for tourists. In other words, it's a little-known spot. Usually people go down, the road comes to a fork, and to the right, it either goes to Tbilisi or back to Gori. And if you drive just a little to the left, so when you come down from this road, first there's an old tower standing there with a staircase, and to the left is the settlement of Nichbisi. And there inside Nichbisi, if you go a little deeper and higher up, there's a huge fortress. Really magnificent. So the entrance to the fortress is closed off with a stick because inside they always have cows grazing, and the more cows...
The safest cowshed.
Absolutely, yes. It's amazing. So they have two favorite spots there in the summer. There, the central tower has been preserved. Well, they were probably reconstructed during Soviet times without balconies. Just a central aristocratic tower because...
It feels like the lower floor there has been preserved. The ceilings are quite complex there.
Yes, the ceilings are intricate. There are fireplaces. All of that is still there. And this is the Tsitsishvili fortress. There was a Tsitsianov, one of the first chief administrators of Georgia, but he was from a different branch. And the Tsitsishvili family, a large family, owned it. So this is their central tower. And then there are the palace ruins. Well, it's just ruins now. Although I found out that during Soviet times there was a school there. I even met an old man who studied there. Here.
Imagine that.
Can you imagine in a fortress? I went to school in a fortress. Cool. And at the very end, on the slope, right at the end, there's the so-called pharmacy. Basically, like in medieval fortresses, there were these niches where they would usually store herbs or something like that.
Like little cabinets with drawers, sort of, right?
And at the very bottom of the bathhouse, you know, the classic ones with domes, they were apparently restored during Soviet times as well. And so the cows graze either in the central princely house, that tower where you can climb up to the roof, or in the bathhouses.
They live well?
It's really interesting.
Very privileged cows, truly.
It's chilly, yeah. But because of that, you can't really go into the bathhouse, of course.
You have to be careful there. Know where you're stepping.
Yeah, it's really covered in droppings. But overall, it's interesting. I mean, I saw kids there herding, walking around the fortress with those cows, and usually there's no one else around. And if you climb up the tower, there's a really great view all around. It's kind of on a hill, on a slope. And overall, this area is not very well known. Eugene and I were there a couple of years ago, and we explored it thoroughly. So if you keep going further in that direction, there's all sorts of things there. There, we saw an aqueduct right there in the forest, an impressive ancient Persian aqueduct stretching over a small stream. Isn't that right? It used to be much more powerful, didn't it? Well, you really have to climb up there to get to it. The village is called Norio, and you have to climb up higher there. And it's usually marked on Google Maps. It's very unusual to just come across it in such an ordinary place, a village and a forest, and you'd think, what would an aqueduct be doing here? But still, they built a big one here back in the day.
The forest could grow around it later.
Yeah, that's true. It's clear it used to connect something interesting there, but now no traces remain.
And I think that one of the trade routes also passed by Nechbisi.
Absolutely, because in all these regions, you have families one after another. The Tsitsishvili, the Tsitsianovs, a large family with their own estates. The Eristavi, part of the Amilakhvari of Gori, also a prominent family. And our favorite hero, Georgi Sakadze.
How do we without him?
This is the Tarkan Muravov family name. They also had all these estates there, and all of this has been preserved. It's a lot.
Tomorrow I'm actually going to visit them, so I'll send regards to Sakadze and all the Tarkan Muravi.
Wonderful. That's very important. Truly, indeed, certainly, our heavenly patrons.
Of course.
Will you ever share that secret?
Yes, that's a little trick we picked up from our travels.
Excellent.
The places are really interesting, aren't they? From both sides, really. So it's a route you can easily take for a day trip out of Tbilisi. The Battle of Didgori, Tsalku, Nechbisi. And so without overnight stays, let's say, is there enough time? Let's go for the weekend and take a ride. We usually had enough time, 6 or 7 hours, to visit several places, see interesting things, and come back. This is very convenient for those who live in Tbilisi or are visiting briefly and want to see something out of the ordinary.
Yes, exactly. And not the usual tourist routes, you know, the ones everyone already knows, where there are crowds of people, even out of season now, but rather those hidden spots that can tell you much more about the history of Georgia than the popular attractions.
But this must be done, of course, with a guide.
Of course.
Yes, because otherwise you'll just see
Ruins.
the wall's ruins tell you nothing.
And about which there's nothing on Google.
For example, there's the wonderful Ksani Castle. It's really cool. You arrive and, it's just ruins.
By the way, I tried to get there recently, to Ksani Castle, and the road has actually gotten even worse than before. And we were there after a snowfall, so it was genuinely dangerous and risky to walk along the very edge of the extremely slippery path. We didn't reach the top.
So even such a wonderful place is now basically inaccessible.
Yes, back in Soviet times there was a road built there, but it was washed away. Let me start by saying what I truly love about Georgia. I absolutely love the old historic mining towns. These are, for example, such as Chiatura, and just a little bit further to the west, the town of Tikibuli. Manganese was mined in Chiatura and coal in Tikibuli, and they started to develop in this way at roughly the same time in the 19th century. There's about a 10 to 15 year difference between when mining began in each place and in a very similar fashion, with peasants being recruited to work both in the fields and in the mines. But there is one difference. I recently read in a wonderful book of ethnographic studies of these regions that the peasants from villages neighboring Chiatura were in no hurry to marry off their daughters to Chiatura workers, despite the fact that those workers earned quite a decent wage for those times because they considered the place to be hell. The working conditions there, of course, were extremely harsh.
It seems to me that even now the conditions there are still rather poor. So you can only imagine what it was like 100 years ago.
Well, of course, there were old oil lamps, a variety of simple hand tools, and some of the mining passages were actually done while lying down, so there were constant fires and deafening noise.
Yeah, I'm getting claustrophobic.
It's an incredibly harsh place and challenging for anyone to survive in.
You may know this, but for listeners, there's a place called Sakdrisi Hill.
By the way, when you mentioned it, I wanted to mention Sakdrisi, but I decided not to interrupt.
Sakdrisi
I don't know, go ahead.
Sakdrisi is a hill in Bolnisi, I think, right?
Between Bolnisi and Demanisi.
In that area, at this very moment,
Oh, you mean the gold?
yes, where they mine gold. Now it's inaccessible. It was basically destroyed by the company that's mining gold there, but we managed to study it and move the artifacts to the Bolnisi Museum. I mean, it's one of the oldest, one of the most ancient mines in the world, really, where something was extracted. And it's interesting. At the Bolnisi Museum, you look at these tools, at what they used to mine, right? And sometimes you can even draw parallels, as if up to the 19th century, basically. In 5,000 years, not much has changed. The conditions are the same.
Of course, the pace of development has increased significantly. And it was also amusingly mentioned there that, of course, when Soviet research came in, well, these were Soviet studies, as is well known. They actively promoted the actions of the Soviet government to enhance and improve the living and working conditions of miners. And it was stated that, indeed, they truly and smoothly transitioned from manual labor to things like jackhammers, pneumatic drills, mechanical tools, and all that sort of modern equipment. And they especially celebrated local miners who were able to make certain improvements to the equipment. For example, one miner was awarded for reducing the vibration from the jackhammer, because vibration disease is one of the problems that miners have faced, let's say, more or less since the 20th century. So their hands would shake less because of this, since they would come.
I think for the Stakhanovites, their hands still shook, though. This was quite a popular story during Soviet times.
Yes, and actually, well, let's say you can probably get to Kyatura and Tikibuli in a single day, but it's better to choose one of the cities and get acquainted with it in general terms. But ideally, of course, you should go there with an overnight stay because there's so much to explore. First of all, the landscapes are stunning. And as a fan of cable cars, I have to add that there are a huge number of them there, especially in Kyatura and in Tikibuli. There was probably one of the most picturesque ones, which took us to Chkrajvari, the Mountain of Nine Crosses. So, in order to justify building a cable car to such a somewhat religious and in general a cult site, they decided to build a sanatorium there. Like, well, if a cable car leads to the sanatorium, let's just build it. So,
Pilgrims are coming, let's make a sanatorium.
and right nearby is the vast Racha region, which deserves its own discussion.
Well, from Skrajvari, of course, we can see Imereti in one direction, and in the other direction, we can already see Racha, also very beautiful.
In fact, we've only just touched on a tiny bit. Even by Georgia's scale, it's just about 5%, and we're already talking. Yes, already so many conversations.
We've already been talking for an hour.
It's incredibly diverse.
Zhenya, I also wanted to ask, what do you generally tend to show guests, for instance, in Kyatura and Tikibuli? So, for example, what is your personal favorite there? Well, aside from the cable cars, which you're an expert on.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Actually, I'll start with Kyatura, because Kyatura is a place where, well, Stalin made an appearance there. That's just how it happened. It was there that he rallied the workers to rise up during the revolution of 1905. He really managed to stir things up there, and as a result, as you might imagine, an entire poem called Spring in the Black City was dedicated to those events. And during a trip around Kyatura, I gradually reveal certain parts of this poem to my guests, because aside from all the usual propagandistic, revolutionary nonsense, it also contains beautiful descriptions of nature and the everyday life of the miners. And you look at how things were described back then and how they are now, the working conditions, how they used to suffocate from the fumes in those mines, and how now at least things are a bit better. You see, after all, the Soviet Union, as it was commonly known at the time, was in essence fundamentally a state of workers and peasants. And for the workers, among others, at least some clubs, theaters, stadiums, and all sorts of things were built. And all of this has been preserved in excellent condition. For a relatively small town, where approximately 14,000 people currently live and call home, you can actually see a large stadium that has seating for as many as 10,000 people. It's like, wow. The scale was, of course, astonishing. Well, of course, the population supposedly reached up to 30,000, but there, even if you set aside the cable cars, there is a lot of Soviet architecture from different periods. And there is something even more ancient. Nearby, There is the Katski pillar, and next to it, an amazing, truly stunning, rotunda-shaped church, also, I believe, from the 9th or 10th century. Next to this pillar, there is a monastery called, I think, Gvineve. It is located inside the rock. That too is an ancient site. There are just cliffs and caves as well. So really, you could spend the whole week just exploring Chiatura on completely different levels. As for Takibuli, for me, since I discovered Takibuli later, it's like, the son of my mom's friend compared to Chiatura. Right now in Takibuli, for some reason, maybe because the mines there haven't stopped operating, a lot of money is being invested. The city has been renovated, the facades are spotless, the buildings that are in ruins in Chiatura have been restored and are in use there, for example, the Palace of Pioneers. And overall, there are a lot of similar parallels. But for me, Chiatura, with its many cable cars, still comes out on top for now, but of course Tikibuli is also really cool.
In that same area, Sachkir also has about...
You just pass through Sachkir on the way to Chiatura. Yes, it's basically...
there as well. That place is unusual in the sense that, of course, it's a whole separate topic to talk about. For example, there's the Vani Museum, which is super cool in Western Georgia. It's all about ancient Georgia, and even in the Vani Museum, the staff told me, Sachkir always stop by us in Sachkir. And Sachkir, there too, is an ancient city, both medieval and from the antiquity period, and some huge layer of unique discoveries was made there. There was an entire complex there. It's that I don't talk about them in detail because I haven't gotten around to it myself yet. I know a little bit. But it's worth noting that one of the fathers of the Georgian nation, Akaki Tsereteli, is from the Sachkir region. The Tsereteli castle is there, though it's nearly in ruins now. They say there's a large hill left, and you can enjoy beautiful views of the surroundings from there. The Tseretelis did come from there. That's where their main branch originated. It's there.
And, Constantine is from there as well. His father, as it happens, is originally from Chiatura as well.
Yes, all the Tseretelis are Imeretians. It was the Tseretelis who basically started the mines.
Made a living.
It was most definitely their idea.
That was Akaki's idea. Yes, he was the one who started it. For me, while for many people, Akaki Tsereteli is known as the author of the lyrics to the poem that later became the song Suliko, for me, first and foremost, he's not the most successful entrepreneur in the sense that he actually went bankrupt. But with his idea, he inspired many foreign investors who then invested and established what is now called classic mining operations.
He was a progressive person in terms of technology?
Yes.
I have a question about Chiatura. Is the river still called the Black River? I haven't been there in a long time. I used to go back when the old cable cars were running and the river was pitch black.
Right now, at this very moment, it is a dark grey-brown color. Yes, indeed, and this is probably because, and it should definitely be mentioned, that most of the mines in the area are currently shut down and not operating. The reason for this situation is, at least according to the company Georgian Manganese, that they simply cannot sell their products anywhere at all. Many workers are now on strike. Some have even talked about blocking roads in order to transport certain goods and to get to the site. But really, nature hasn't cleaned up that much, though it seems to me that the color of the water has become at least a little lighter. The first time I was there in December 2022, I was really struck by how black the water was, and now either I've gotten used to it or it really has become less black. So,
I was really struck by the cows resting on manganese piles or grazing on grass there.
Manganese cows, manganese pigs, manganese chickens, right? And they even grow tea there, and there's also wine from that region.
Everything is pinkish, with a manganese supplement for your body right away.
Practically, essentially rare earth metals.
Well, listen, at least it's not lead. For example, in Racha, those old metal smelting mines and all sorts of lead workings are still open and unguarded. And in reality, who really knows exactly what, and in what quantities, perhaps even in significant amounts, is actually getting into the soil there?
Into nature.
It's not so bad that Racha ham is now being made more in Tbilisi, right? Well, it's a sad story that their pigs died off so massively, unfortunately, in Racha, and it still hasn't recovered.
Could you elaborate? I think for today we can actually wrap up with the story about the pig die-off in Racha.
That would be a sad ending. Yeah, a sad ending, only on a somber note.
In any case, tell us.
Well,
we can cut it out.
The story there is that there were, epidemics among livestock started, specifically among pigs.
When?
I think it was about 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
So relatively recently.
Yes, and because of that, Well, a huge number of pigs died in Racha, and they still haven't been able to restore the population to its previous level. As a result, you rarely find Racha ham in Racha itself these days. It has become a rarity, a real shortage, yes. I mean, of course, it's relatively easy to make. It doesn't have to be made in Racha. That's why in Tbilisi, the same people from Racha who live in Tbilisi make it, because it requires salting, drying, and a certain amount of time. That's it. And here in the city, you can find it. But when I ask the local people from Racha, they say, in Tbilisi, of course, you'll find it, but in Racha, no, because there's nothing there. I mean, it's not produced on a large scale like it used to be. I don't know. Basically, every time I go to Racha, and I actually go there several times a year, I always eat absolutely delicious Racha ham. I treat my friends and my guests to it, and I always bring some home with me every single time. So, in fact, a lot of families still make Racha ham for themselves. It's just not like it used to be when it was sold as a brand, something specifically from Racha. Rachuli Lori. Now it's just, well...
Let's put it this way, it's just some typical Racha winter food. Because the lobio that people are used to making in Racha, of course, is made specifically with ham.
I actually discovered for myself the proper way to eat lobiani. That is khachapuri with beans, which is if you open it up a little, put a piece of ham inside, it's just mind-blowing. And of course, lobio with lori is essentially the same thing. So when you've spent your whole life just eating regular, sometimes even quite delicious and tasty food, and then all of a sudden you unexpectedly come to discover a whole entirely new and truly remarkable level of experience with it.
That's why when I eat khachapuri, lobiani, or lori, I look...
All right now. If we keep going, a whole abyss will open up and I'll end up spending another half hour telling you about different types of beans, types of ham, and everything else. Because of course, food is an absolutely inexhaustible topic, especially uneatable. Yes, uneatable Georgian food.
It's really great that we actually had this conversation. I honestly like it a lot. We started this discussion, at least, with some of these small places for now, just to begin with, and that's something I truly appreciate. But I think we can just keep going and share even more. I think it would be interesting to hear our listeners' opinions and read some comments, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they might add, or what they'd like to hear more about.
Questions, requests.
Questions, yes.
Questions, suggestions, proposals.
Based on those responses, we'll think about where to go next. What else? What else could we talk about? What would be interesting? By the way, we also have an idea in our plans to talk about genealogy. That's another topic, archives and genealogy in general, not necessarily just Georgian, but overall what's available in Georgia.
Oh, means I'll have silly questions.
Absolutely. We're definitely counting on you for that.
So let's just call the show Silly Questions.
Silly questions.
Good version. So dear friends, today you were joined by our wonderful colleagues Vitaly, Shtybin, Eliseeva, and Evgeny Vyazemtsev. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. We hope you enjoyed spending time with us. Don't forget to send in your questions. Send your donations to Vitaly Shtybin. He might share them with you later, maybe. And now, a moment of gratitude.
Yes, today we're actually sitting here with you in a wonderful, welcoming place. This is the Paper's co-working space and podcast studio, right?
Podcast, yes. An amazing studio with awesome soundproofing and great audio quality. A big thank you to them for hosting us and letting us have a lively chat.
And excellent equipment. In any case, have a great day, evening, or morning. Thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.
Bye. We're off to drink some Georgian wine to your health.
Hooray.